Sounds good. So I could just go ahead and explain this project, but I feel like that's kind of boring and you guys are too smart for that. So can anybody tell me what social engineering is? Go ahead.
It's the use of like tricks and social tactics to get people to give you information or access that you don't usually have.
That's a perfect definition. So I like to break it up to like look at the individual words. Social, dealing with people. Engineering, using technology in creative ways to problem solve. So social engineering is exactly what you said, tricking people basically into giving you access to things you're not supposed to have access to. So when it comes to social engineering, what techniques are there? Anybody got suggestions?
Phishing.
Phishing, all right. So what's phishing? Let's see if you can define that.
Sending like fake emails and stuff like that.
Sure. So it's actually, yeah. So it's a pretty broad concept, but essentially, I would define it as. Let's see. I want to give you a good definition here. Getting people to either open a malicious link or to download a malicious file and getting in through that way. And the malicious link may, when it comes to malicious links, you have like credential harvesting. So that's if you give somebody a fake login page and they enter their credentials in the login page, but you're hosting the login page. So for example, you could, if you sent somebody like a link to something, and you said, oh, but you have to sign in to view the link, and then you duplicated the Gmail login page, but it's actually hosted on your server, so as soon as they enter their credentials, you get their credentials. That's a credential harvesting attack. That's one thing. There's, of course, fake emails, as you said. So you can actually send emails as anyone you want, right? Now there are, because a lot of attackers have done this, they created certain security measures in place to stop people from doing that. So there's SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. So SPF ensures that your email is actually coming from a trusted user on that domain. So each email has a domain associated with it. And you get SPF records from their domain name server, DNS server, and it ensures that the person who's sending is supposed to be able to send to you. DKIM uses public key cryptography to ensure that the person who sent it is actually who they say they are, right? Because you have their public key. Actually, the DNS server has their public key, and then they're the only ones with their private key. And then DMARC basically specifies the rules of, oh, I received this email, but it's not from the original, it's not from who it says it's from. What am I supposed to do with it? Am I supposed to put it in spam? Am I supposed to report to somebody? And then that's DMARC. So, yeah, so that's, if you use Google, if you use Gmail, for example, by every email you receive, there's like a little arrow, and if you click it, it'll actually tell you if there's a certificate associated with the email. And if there is a certificate associated with the email, you know that it passed these checks, as long as it didn't go to spam. So, there's that. But of course, not every email has a certificate associated with it. It's kind of a new thing. So, and with Google, for a lot of people use Gmail for things, but Gmail works in such a way that even if you send it as somebody else that also has a Gmail account, you can pretty much spoof anybody's Gmail, and there's really no way of figuring it out because it'll still say it came from Google. Yeah, fun stuff. All right, let's see. What else do we have? Well, all right, we know we have attacks like these, but the question is, how do we go about? So let's say I'm attacking someone. What would be my first step? What's the first step you do if you're going to attack someone? Any ideas? Go ahead.
Information gathering?
Perfect. Information gathering. Now, if we were having this conversation on pen testing instead of social engineering, then I'd talk about like scanning and tools like Nmap, stuff like that. But because we're talking about social engineering, most of information gathering is going to be open source intelligence tools. So, OSINT or open source intelligence. So, does anybody know any open source intelligence tools? Very good. Google. And I'll say Google and Google hacking. So if I'm going to attack a company, Google is highly underrated. That's probably the first place I would go. Like if I were attacking IIT, Google has all sorts of flags that you can add to searches like site. So if I did site iit.edu, it would just search everything that's on the iit.edu domain, and I can look for subdomains and then kind of scope out their network. There's like type. So if I looked for PHP, which is notoriously vulnerable, I could look for PHP pages. I could look for type PDF and maybe search for something like type PDF and then password and see if, because a lot of times people just randomly put passwords for things in PDF files and leave them exposed on the internet. So yeah, all sorts of cool things I can do. Couple other open source intelligence tools. We have Meltigo. That's a very popular one. Unfortunately, I was looking into Meltigo, and there's not much you can do with it for free. That's really cool. A lot of the modules are paid, but there's still some stuff you can do with it. So Meltigo comes built in with Kali Linux and Parrot OS, for those of you who aren't that into security yet, but are going to be. Those are the typical operating systems that attackers use. So it's the software itself is free, but there are a lot of paid modules for it. There's like recon-ng, which can also be used for scanning. If you are familiar with Metasploit, the exploitation framework, it works the same way, but it's specifically for information gathering. So there are a lot of scanning modules, but there are also a lot of open source intelligence modules built in within it. And there, of course, there are more. I'm not going to go into all of them. There are also, like, if you're specifically targeting people, like if you, okay, along with phishing, spear phishing is a type of phishing. So spear phishing means, phishing is just a general term. So you could be targeting, you could be sending out mass emails and that would still be considered phishing. But spear phishing means I want to target this specific person. So I'm going to look at all this information on this one specific person and see if I can target an attack towards them. So if you were doing something like that, there's all sorts of, there's like person finder, there's people. I'm just saying people in particular because it comes with Meltigo, but there are a bunch of those for looking up information about people in databases, and you can, in just knowing a person's name, you could find their phone number, you could find their address. There are actually some free sites online that if you look up people's name, you can find their address and stuff like that. So, good stuff. And I should mention, because I did talk a little bit about Meltigo, Meltigo allows you to create like a graph. So if you know one piece of information about a person, like their name, you can create a graph of like, here's all their social media accounts. And then from there, you can use that node in the graph, like this social media account, to find out more information about them. So yeah. So this is pretty good. There's one thing I feel like I'm missing. Aside from these two for social engineering, aside from like fake emails and phishing and stuff, what's another way you can get into people's stuff using social engineering? Say that again?
Caller ID spoofing?
Caller ID spoofing? Sure. Yes. I'm not focusing on that as much here because we're doing, that's more in terms of like calls and stuff. But we're doing more targeting computers as opposed to that. But yes, definitely, I will include that. I will include that. Similar to caller ID spoofing, I'd say, is MAC address spoofing. That's kind of like, I guess, the computer version of that. So a lot of the times, you know when you go to like an airport or a coffee shop, those are the typical examples that are used, and they offer you internet, but you have to pay for it. But you can actually get in for free, and then you have to log in on this page, and if you pay for their service, they'll let you use their internet. Well, the way they do it is they whitelist, because every computer has their own MAC address. The MAC address is the built-in hardware address of the computer. And so they whitelist specific MAC addresses if you sign up for their service. So what somebody could do is they could fake. Spoofing just means, all right, I should mention, what does spoofing mean? Spoofing just means faking. So caller ID spoofing is faking you have a different caller ID than you actually do. MAC address spoofing is faking that you have a different MAC address than you actually do. So if you wanted to gain access to a coffee shop network, you can see who else is using the network. You can take one of their MAC addresses, and you can use their MAC address to gain access to the internet. Fun stuff. Similar to MAC address spoofing, Arp poisoning, that's kind of a common one. That's basically ARP, Address Resolution Protocol, is computers, when you communicate between computers, you use IP addresses, right? Or Internet Protocol addresses. And that's how you identify one computer from another. But the way it's done is, when one computer wants to communicate with another, they say, hey, which computer has IP this? Like 192.168.1. whatever. And then that computer will respond and say, I have this IP, here's my MAC address, communicate with me. But Arp poisoning is sending those replies as an attacker. Like if somebody says, I want to communicate with this computer, you as the attacker will be like, hi, I'm actually that computer, but you're not. So the neat thing about this is, like, if you have, this computer wants to communicate with this one. Normally it would say, like, who has IP? And this computer would say, I do. And then they'd establish a connection. That's what normally would happen. But in Arp poisoning, you could do something like this. Let's say you're the attacker right here. This computer asks, who has this IP? You say, I do. You establish a connection with this computer. And then you forward all their traffic to the actual computer that they're trying to communicate with. Now this way, they are actually communicating with this computer, but all of their network traffic is being forwarded through you. And vice versa, all the traffic from that other computer is also being forwarded through you. Can anybody tell me what that's called?
Man in the middle.
Very good. Man in the middle attack. I'll just say MITM for man in the middle. There are a number of tools in Kali Linux for doing that. Like there's EtherCap. There's Man in the Middle Framework. I actually used Man in the Middle Framework for a while. Now there's BetterCap, which is kind of replacing these because it's just better. Hence the name. So why is that dangerous? What can a person do as a man in the middle? Go ahead.
See all unencrypted traffic?
Perfect. You can view all the traffic that's going between these two computers. In addition to that, you said view unencrypted traffic. I will add to that. Let's say you wanted to view encrypted traffic, like HTTPS. There's a technique called Ssl Stripping, where basically this person tries to make an encrypted connection with the machine they want to communicate with, and you say, well, no, I'm leaving our traffic unencrypted, but I'm going to make the encrypted connection with this machine. That's SSL stripping. And then you'll notice that any passwords are sent in plain text between, or I guess only encrypted for this machine, between these two computers, so you can view all the passwords, but still make those connections with that target machine. This doesn't always work. There are security protocols that prevent this, like HSTS, which forces HTTPS connections from here to the target. I won't really get into that. I know I'm kind of fumbling with my words a little bit, but essentially, that's Arp Poisoning. Let's see. One more thing we're missing. The thing that everybody thinks is cool for some reason, USB attacks. So plugging in a USB to a computer and gaining access that way. Can anybody tell me how that works? It's kind of a trick question. It has a number of right answers. Go ahead.
You get a device like a Raspberry Pi Pico or a rubber ducky, and the computer views it as a human interface like a keyboard, and it would be able to do that.
Perfect. I like that answer. I also like the term rubber ducky, so I'm going to include it. So back in the day, you could auto-run USB devices. So like Windows XP, I think, and before that, you could auto-run USBs. So all you had to do was plug it in, and it would run whatever you wanted it to run. And as an attacker, you could run something that would connect to you or do something malicious. But then they realized attackers were doing that, and they were like, we can't do that anymore. So up until Windows 7, I think, and I'm just talking about Windows because this whole project is going to be Windows oriented, but until Windows 7, you could not auto-run USBs, but you could auto-run CDs or DVDs. So if you could emulate a CD or DVD device, you could still perform USB attacks. Then they realized people were doing that, so in Windows 8 and beyond, they decided to discontinue that. However, that doesn't make these null and void because, as you said, you can still emulate things like a keyboard. Whoops. Keyboard and mouse. Or a network, like a network interface. Or I should say network adapter. Now they can't really stop this because sometimes you actually want to connect a keyboard to your computer, or you want to connect a mouse to your computer and you want to be able to use that, right? Or sometimes you want to be able to connect a network adapter to your computer so you could have an additional network card that's external to your computer, right? So, but this opens up a lot of possibilities because if you can pretend that you're a keyboard, then you can send in any keystrokes you want. And you can do it so fast that the user will not see them, but the computer will still register them. And you can open a command line terminal and connect to whoever you want to connect to or do whatever malicious things you want to do. Good stuff. Last thing I'm going to briefly mention, I think this is a good picture. There's also like there's physical pen testing, which I am using to say anything that's not necessarily security oriented. So like caller ID spoofing might even fit into this. Anything that's not necessarily like computer oriented, but you're still tricking the people, like calling somebody on the phone, pretending to be tech support, pretending that there's a new update they have to install, and whatnot. And also, that's like, I guess you could call that person social engineering, tricking people. And then beyond the scope of this, really, because we're cybersecurity oriented, but there's also like actual physical pen testing tools. Like if you're trying to break into somewhere, you use an under the door tool. You could use a traveler's hook. You could use a hinge pin tool to take a door off its hinges. Stuff like that. That's kind of beyond the scope of this because we're trying to keep it cybersecurity related. All right. I feel like there was one thing that I was remembering that now I forgot. That's pretty good. If there's anything anybody would like to add, let me know.